And then I just watched it, the pendulum swing. And my dad always used to talk about the pendulum swinging, and the pendulum has swung so far now that people think that it's unhealthy not to go on hormone therapy. And I don't know where that came from. And it doesn't make any sense.
We talk a lot in women's health about the funding gaps, but I think what we don't talk enough about is the information gap.
This is so crazy. How would the average woman know that now, instead of having the sovereignty to decide, maybe going on the lowest dose, see how they feel, they've now put all their power into a doctor who's testing hormones and telling them what they need, but not recognizing that we also make hormones in our tissues.
In women's health, misinformation doesn't just confuse people, it reallocates power. It turns uncertainty into dependency and dependency into revenues. Anne-Marie McQueen is the founder of Hot Flash Inc., a global media platform devoted to perimenopause, menopause, and the midlife transition. She has spent more than 3 decades in health journalism, building a research-backed newsletter, a podcast, and a community that helps women navigate the most commercialized information gap in modern healthcare. I'm Marianne Sell. This is Blind Spot Capital. And today we're going inside the menopause information economy to see how trust is built, how narratives spread, and how independent media becomes market infrastructure long before institutions catch up. When Anne-Marie McQueen launched Hot Flash Inc. in June 2020, she brought 3 decades of health journalism experience to a space defined by misinformation, medical gaslighting, and information gaps. So what started as a weekly research letter has grown into a community of more than 20,000 subscribers across 40 countries. Women navigating perimenopause themselves. Her work reveals a critical blind spot. While billions are invested in women's health innovation, reliable, accessible information infrastructure remains largely community built. So in this episode, we're going to explore how independent media creates market infrastructure, why trust matters more than reach, and what happens when journalists become entrepreneurs out of necessity. Anne-Marie, it's great to have you here.
It's so great to speak to you. I just love what you're doing.
I love what you're doing to a girl fan here, and as I said to you before, with the camera started rolling, I first came across your work in a solo episode that you recorded on Substack, about hormone therapy confusion and 5 years of building Hot Flash Inc. And I think what struck me was that you weren't speaking like an advocate or a skeptic. You were speaking like someone in the middle of the system, just trying to make sense of it all. And I just found that incredibly refreshing. So I started following you. That's when I started following you and your work more closely. And I think what I love so much about you is that you don't just show up as a menopause journalist or a platform founder. You show up as a full human being. And as I started following you, I came across this random facts, this list that you shared with your community, and 3 of them really stayed with me. I think the first one was that you were a competitive figure skater growing up in Canada. We have the Winter Olympics now. So I'm just like, oh my God. The second one was you knew you wanted to be a journalist from a very young age. And then there was this moment at 14 when you were in this giant bear costume that you read about. You're handing out flyers, and then you got your period and you quietly had to walk away from that job. And I remember reading that and just thinking, this is why people trust you, because you don't present yourself as an expert that's just shouting answers. You present yourself as a woman who's lived a very real human life. And maybe we can start there. So for anyone who's kind of logging into this podcast, doesn't know about Hot Flash Inc., doesn't know who Anne-Marie McQueen is, who were you before you started building the platform? Or who are you?
Who am I? Oh, that's really nice. I really needed to hear that today. Thank you. That poor man I gave that bear costume back to. I don't even know if I ever told anyone that at the time. I am a very driven person, and I had a real focus that I wanted to be a journalist. And I don't know that I knew of what kind of person I wanted to be, if I wanted to be on the 6 o'clock news, if I wanted to be covering wars. I don't know. I really love telling stories. And I think that I've always had that in me ever since I was a little girl. And I always liked writing. So it wasn't a surprise to anyone that I ended up doing this. I am someone who hasn't gotten married or had children. And that's something I always wanted. So that's really informed my life, because not doing the thing that everyone does is really difficult. And I beat myself up about that for a very long time and sort of acted like my life was sort of like maybe 3/4 of as important as everyone else. And I think that pushed me in a way that makes me sad now to feel that I had to be like unbelievably amazing and accomplishing and have the most interesting stories and have the most interesting career. And there was a lot of like over functioning because I wasn't sort of doing what everyone else was doing. And then I've always been someone who liked to have a lot of fun. I really like was kind of a party girl and loved traveling. And it's interesting that I ended up living overseas because I never thought about it. I never thought that I was the kind of person that would ever live abroad, but I had the yearning in me. I just didn't know what to call it. And so I found a job in Abu Dhabi, and this newspaper was launching in 2008. And it was like a calling to move abroad. And now I know that I needed to live abroad, which changes you so much. Stepping outside of what everyone thinks you are and going into a completely different place and starting a different life has totally shaped me. And I've always been a person who's thought differently, and that's been quite irritating to my editors. But I have an editor from one of my papers that I worked at in Canada, and he said, "You've always thought differently, and you gave us not trouble, but it's like when you're the person coming with an inconvenient thing that's real and true, it's a little bit of an annoyance. It's like, oh, we hadn't said that because now we have to think about that." So living overseas like strengthened that muscle. I was really, the perspective you get from moving out of the bubble of North America and moving, and the perspective I got from living and moving to this part of the world where there's like 200 plus nationalities, all of that just shaped me into someone who's just like endlessly curious, really like a dog with a bone, just sort of getting at the truth of things. And I just love content and telling stories in all sorts of ways. I always kept up with all the trends, like I adopted social media. I was one of the first people at my newspaper chain in Canada to be given a blog, and I did the Twitter, and I was, tweeting from court, and I was doing all those things that the other journalists didn't want to do. And so that led me up to perimenopause and sort of, I guess, elongating my career for myself by launching my own thing.
So you love telling stories. What sort of stories did you love chasing?
Oh my gosh. Anything and everything. Like I was thinking the other day that I was driving in Ottawa, the nation's capital, in the early 2000s, and I saw a girl walking a dog, and she had like a harness on it because the back legs of the dog weren't working. Well, this is something you might see more now. In early 2000, this was something I'd never seen that before. There's no social media. Now there's accounts of dogs and cats that are disabled. So I just pulled over and chased her down and said, "Can I talk to you?" And that's the kind of thing I would do all the time. Like I would love human interest type stories like that. So I ended up going to her apartment and interviewing her. I remember I interviewed a guy who had this first internet radio station. It seemed kooky. I spoke to, I always liked underdog stories too. Like one of the stories that I really, really liked doing that I'm really proud of was early on, when you go back to Canada, cannabis is everywhere. It's shocking. Like it's so ubiquitous, but it was so illegal when I was growing up. And there was an early group of campaigners who were people who were chronically ill, and they wanted it for their illnesses and they wanted it for their pain. And I did a big story on their fight to make it legal for medical reasons. And, another story I remembered was like when they were trying to ban smoking in Ottawa when I lived there. And I would interview the people who wanted to ban smoking, and then I would interview the smokers who were mad and they wanted to keep smoking. I would always phone them up, and every time it would be in city council. I covered city council for a year, and every time it came before city council, then I would phone up the smoking lobby, and he'd be coughing and hacking on the phone, but he deserved to say his piece. And that's the part of journalism that I love too, is talking to all sides. And that's the part that we don't get anymore, right? Like news isn't like that anymore. Most stories are pretty slanted.
Yeah. Now I'm going to talk to you about the misinformation. But before I go there, I think from what I'm hearing, your love of stories and your love of telling human stories and unusual stories, I can sort of see how somewhere along the way, your own body became the story. Take me back to when you first realized you were in perimenopause. What was happening in your body and maybe in your life at the time?
So this was very terrifying for me. And I'm learning about myself more and more as I get older. But
yes,
we all have things from our childhood and we all have coping mechanisms. And early in my 30s, I had just lost my mom to cancer. I was reporting for a daily newspaper and doing some really scary stuff, going to murder scenes, seeing bodies pulled out of rivers, going to bad accidents. And I wasn't prepared for any of that stuff. And I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. And so that started a time of just chronic stress. I didn't really grieve my mom properly. It was devastating. And that started decades of gut issues, IBS. And so I always struggled a lot in my life and I never really understood. I'd say to people, like, I don't feel like I'm bipolar, but I just feel like I could have a shadow bipolar. I read an article that said you can have, we know so much more about psychology now. I think I just constantly struggled. I think I had ADHD and perhaps a little bit on the autism spectrum. I haven't been formally diagnosed. I'm not going to be bothered to do it probably, but I just know I know myself, and people who know me know I'm a little bit odd. I'm overwhelmed frequently. And then I had gut issues and I had, hormonal issues. And so when I hit perimenopause, it was awful. And now I know that when that progesterone recedes, that it leaves your resilience low. And some of the things that started to happen to me that I just had no idea what was happening. Now I know what was happening, but I started to experience just really terrible anxiety, panic attacks, like tantrums almost, like just really losing it if like I spilled something. I started having nightmares like almost every night. And I would have a nightmare that I was dying. I would wake up and I was dying. And I was supposed to be taking medication, but I hadn't taken it for a while. So I would wake up night after night, just like scrambling on my bedside table, looking for this medication that I wasn't taking. And that was terrifying. Sleep issues. I had so many issues in perimenopause that were just like, I'd have these and then I'd come out of it. And then I saw probably 12 doctors. I was in the ER twice, like once with a terrible headache that had lasted for more than 10 days. Once with chest pains. This isn't all at once. Like this is over 6-7 years. And at one point I had adrenal exhaustion, like all my eyelashes fell out. I had a really hard time. And I had no idea what was going on. No one said anything about hormones. I had written about menopause in my 30s because the boomers were all going through it. And I'd written about the boomers all turning 50 and no one said a thing about perimenopause. Like I went back and found that article that I wrote and there was, I don't think that was a word that was used. So when I realized what was going on, it was a big relief. And of course I didn't want to be in perimenopause. This is one of the problems is that I think women in their 40s will fight, I'm generalizing here, but I think we will fight tooth and nail to have it not be perimenopause. And that makes it much harder. And the reason is that perimenopause then means that you truly are getting older and you're going to face the end of, your reproductive capabilities and whatever that meant for me. I was still hoping to get married and have kids. I just think it's something that it's like, I don't know. I don't know when I thought I was going to go through menopause at 60 or something. I just wasn't ready.
So when you launched Hot Flash Inc. in 2020, I guess what was the motivation behind it? Why did you think, or what made you realize that perimenopause and menopause needed a dedicated platform?
So when I first of all, when I was 45 and all these health problems were going on, I read this book by a menopause doctor and she explained what happens when you go through menopause. And it sounded actually great. Like she explained what happened in a really factual way and how when you do go through menopause, however you choose to do it, hormones sort of end up at a level, your luteinizing hormone and your follicle stimulating hormones, they're high and they're at those levels that they are that day after your cycle when you feel amazing and you're kind of at this level. And that's why menopausal women feel great. And I was like, great. That's great. I can do
Yes.
this, Meanwhile, I was in the middle of perimenopause. So I didn't know. At 47-ish, I skipped a period, and that's when I was like, huh. So I, like, whenever I want to learn about a topic, then I would put in a Google alert just for the topic,
Yes.
So I put perimenopause and menopause, and I hated the content. Like, I just hated it. It was like, weirdly, the Daily Mail became a pretty good source of information about perimenopause and menopause. But back then it was like, sort of like, it was really fear mongering, or it was just overly SEO. Like, they'd put dry vagina like 25 times in the article to like, or it was just heavily commercialized. It was up for someone's website, or it was fear mongering. So I hated all of it. And I am the person, back then I was a features editor, and I had this whole staff, and I had online and blogs and social media. And I just loved pulling all these levers. And I just thought I can do a better job at this. And this needs, and then I could see that it was going to be something big. Like, I could see that. I think every woman who's gone, who does something and is going through menopause, every wave, women, they were trying to make it so that there was no shame and no stigma. And you can see that in old television shows, and you can see it in writing and books. But I truly felt that Gen X was not going to do this. Like, I was not going to feel ashamed of myself for going through something that is just a completely natural thing. And I could see it galloping and gathering steam before celebrity. And I could see that no celebrities were talking about it ever, like none. I was seeing those older celebrities covered. I was seeing them covered in magazines and on the covers of magazines, but they weren't talking about menopause or perimenopause. And I knew they must be going through it, right? Like, and they would ask them their health regimes. And I thought, I bet if a reporter would ask them, and then it all started happening. And so anyway, I started a newsletter, and I thought I'll just figure out the business end of it later.
Yeah. So I have two questions, and I'm not quite sure where to go first, but I think it's two things. So maybe I'll just ask both, and you answer it in the best way that you see fit. But two things. So the first is, you were a feature editor at the time. You had blogs, you had social media. Why did you decide, why an independent platform? Why an independent newsletter? Why not just pitch it to your organization and run with it as, a part of your existing infrastructure? I think that's the first one. And the second one I'm really curious about, because you talked about, the Google alerts, but not a lot coming through, not a lot of information. What was the quality of the information that was even there? And what was that like?
Okay, the quality just wasn't good. Like, it wasn't well-rounded with depth. And, even then, it wasn't like the kind of information where you leave thinking you have the full story. And even now, I rarely read an article about perimenopause or menopause that I think is well-rounded and well done. There, a lot of articles are written to promote hormone therapy as the option. Like, it just seems to be the way it's done. So, and as for an independent platform, I don't know why I was crazy enough to think of doing that. I didn't think. I was here in the UAE, and certainly they would not be writing about menopause at that point. There's no way. I didn't even know that I could really do that here. Like, it seemed like a bit verboten. And I became a freelance, like right around the time I started thinking about Hot Flash, I went freelance, and I was still thinking of what to do about this Hot Flash, and I became freelance. And I realized pretty quickly with freelance, I did very well with freelance because I'm fast and I'm accurate and I write well and I'm a go-getter and overfunctioner. But I realized pretty quickly that you can't scale this. This is just, I can write an article and then I can file it. And I can write another article and I can file it. And there's only so many articles I can write. And I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. Like, I don't want to just write an article and file it and write an article and file it. Maybe ghost write a book for someone. Like, I don't maybe write my own book. I just felt like, I felt like I wanted to do something bigger, but so that's why. Yeah.
Yeah. You've said that, when we talked about the quality of the information in this space, you mentioned something about a lot of articles promoting hormone therapy, almost in certainty, like this is the way you should go. When did you realize that certainty in this space is potentially a red flag?
It was after a couple of years, because in the beginning, I didn't see that many people sharing content, like in terms of doctors and people that I would follow. And in the beginning, the people that I followed were a lot more well-rounded. And then there was like a winnowing for sure in this hormone therapy direction, you know, this narrative of, and I'm not saying this isn't true, but it's an overwhelming narrative that the Women's Health Initiative, women were happily on hormone therapy. And then the Women's Health Initiative came along, and it's a terrible study, which isn't true. Like parts of it, the methodology was a bit messed up and the age groups, but the study itself hasn't been debunked. But this narrative that study came along and then ruined everything, and then women went off hormone therapy and they couldn't get hormone therapy. And all that's true. Like some women went off hormone therapy, they were scared. But the overwhelming push of everyone towards hormone therapy, I started to realize, like, I started to see people growing like so quickly. And I thought I could grow that quickly if all I talked about was hormone therapy, but I just couldn't do it because I can't just talk about hormone therapy all the time.
Yes.
Even before the Women's Health Initiative, you know, 30, 40, 60% of the world wasn't on hormone therapy. Now, like 95% of the world isn't on. There's large swaths of the world where barely anyone's on hormone therapy. It's just not reflective of the whole world that lots of women can't go on it. I personally have tried. I can't go on it, which I think has kind of made me a little bit more objective about it. Yeah. And it's not a popular approach, you know, to say I want everyone to have access to hormone therapy, but you know, there's a few unfinished sentences here. And then I just watched it, the pendulum swing. And my dad always used to talk about the pendulum swinging, and the pendulum has swung so far now that people think that it's unhealthy not to go on hormone therapy. And I don't know where that came from. And it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Now, there is a lot of noise in, menopause, perimenopause. I think the fact that we also have quite a bit of gaps in terms of, you know, scientific studies that have been done, longitudinal studies that have followed women from before menopause through premenopause to menopause and post, that there's lots of people out there who try to sell anything and everything from supplements to you name it, you know, to women, almost taking advantage of that information gap. It's something that, you know, if you're a woman of a certain age, you do get all sorts of ads targeting you on Instagram or on any social media. I guess what I wonder for you, how do you cut through the noise? You know, as a journalist turned founder focusing on, you know, midlife, women in midlife.
I'm having a really hard time. Doing it. I've had a hard time the whole time, and I got really lost with this hormone therapy business. But then I found really smart people, and I found sort of my own belief system, which is very open. And then it's been a little bit easier, you know, and then I sort of spotted the narratives. And once you find some really smart people, and most of the people that for example, I have the Hot Flash Inc. Summit. I had the first summit last year, and I've just become almost allergic to the people who are trying to scare women about all aspects of this. It's so repugnant to me that women would be scaring women about something like this, you know. So I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I just, no fear. Like, I just can't handle anyone scaring us. And that's whether you're a personal trainer or whether you're a doctor who has a big following on social media. You have no business scaring women. And there's definitely more than one way through.
Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot in women's health about the funding gaps. And what you've built, Anne-Marie, is really information infrastructure. And I guess that's what I want to talk about next with you, because, you know, as I said, we mentioned, we talk a lot about the funding gap, but I think what we don't talk enough about is the information gap. In your view, what
what do investors misunderstand about how women actually find and trust information? Or what should investors know about that?
I mean, there are so many gaps in this conversation that it will make your head spin. And if you don't know about them, then you'll just repeat information that you've been told. But I mean, there are so many gaps in just the way people prescribe hormone therapy or what they believe about hormone therapy. Like I've just mapped this out, and there's just like 9 different approaches, but within those, there's all little different approaches. And so if you're a woman trying to figure out what's going on, it really depends who you decide to follow. And that's why I always say, please follow 5 people, and they say different things. But if, I got to remember that most women don't have time, and they're not spending all this time in this space. So it really depends who they end up in front of for help. And if they end up in front of like a mainstream doctor who probably doesn't know that much about hormone therapy, because they don't learn about it in medical school unless they've gone to educate themselves, unless they become a menopause practitioner. And, if they end up in front of a naturopathic doctor or an integrative physician, their care is going to be so much better, because that kind of a doctor is going to say, well, we can put you on hormone therapy, but we might test to see how you are detoxing your hormones and make sure that you're detoxing them properly. Because, that's one area of hormone therapy prescribing where they will make sure that you're detoxing your hormones properly, because estrogen makes things grow, and you want to make sure that it's making good things grow and not bad things grow. And there's 3 detox pathways for estrogen, and one that's not good. And I'm speaking in really broad terms, but some people have genetic dispositions and their estrogen doesn't detox properly. If you go to a mainstream doctor, that's not even going to be discussed. If you end up with a doctor who, there's this saying, test, don't guess. So there's some mainstream doctors, they'll just prescribe hormone therapy and go on how you feel. And if you're a sort of standard person, that might be enough, and that might be great. But I get, even some of my best friends went down the path of, I got my hormones tested, my estrogen's on the floor, and then it's like they're in a crisis situation, right? My estrogen's on the floor, so we topped it up. Well, that in itself is interesting, because even when it comes to testing, there's no uniform belief system about it. You have these people testing and then saying to the woman in front of them, oh, your estrogen's on the floor, we'll put you on hormone therapy, and then I'll bring you back in and test your levels. I mean, I have my friends saying, I had my levels tested. Over here, you have forward-thinking people say, yeah, but the hormone levels in your blood are not the only indication of the hormones in your body. You have them in your tissues. So do you see how messed up it is? Like, it's so crazy. And, I had a friend who said to me at a dinner last year, she said, yeah, I would talk to my doctor again. And she tested and she said, it's time to up your dose because of your levels. And she said, I was feeling fine. But sure enough, when she said that, I started having hot flashes. And I thought, this is so crazy. So, you don't even know that. How would the average woman know that now, instead of having the sovereignty to decide, maybe going on the lowest dose, see how they feel, they've now put all their power into a doctor who's testing hormones and telling them what they need, but not recognizing that we also make hormones in our tissues and other places in our body. I don't know. I feel like I'm the person who makes this complicated, but it is so complicated.
Well, it is, because we're all individual, right? So it is. And actually I asked that because, the post that brought me to you, how I found you, I think you ended that post with a line that said something like, when things get confusing, you ask, who has the most to gain here?
Yeah.
And I think in that spirit, I'm going to put the question back to you to say, what's the one question that you wish every midlife woman asked before she buys something or follows someone or panics because she's heard something?
Who benefits from this fear? Who benefits from me living in this state of fear? Now, I think almost every time there's probably a group of guys that we can't see creating messaging to make sure that you panic and you buy. This is the time to start asking that question.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's been such a joy talking to you. This conversation has been, for me, really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, you're absolutely welcome and absolutely amazing. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in Switzerland. Yes. And for everyone listening, if this episode made you rethink how information infrastructure actually gets built in markets like women's health, which has been overlooked for a while, or if it changed how you think about trust and credibility and where and how women actually turn for answers, then please share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can find Anne-Marie's work at Hot Flash Inc., including her weekly research letter, her podcast, her community, and we'll link everything in the show notes. You can also follow Anne-Marie, especially if you're a woman in midlife. I think her voice is really a credible voice out there, so you should follow her as one of the 5 that she advocates you follow. And you can also follow our work on women's health, capital, and gender-specific innovation at Blind Spot Capital and the Femme Health Alliance. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for building and for being here.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for being part of this community. Have a great day.